The iPod Touch 3rd generation was officially released on September 9th of 2009, which wasn't too different from the 2nd generation of iPod Touch, but things could have gone differently. Hello everyone, Apple Demo here, and today we're going to take a look at an iPod Touch 3rd generation prototype. This particular iPod Touch prototype was not in the best condition when it arrived, currently being shown as how it eventually turned out. But let's start from the very beginning. Yep, well, that's more like it. This prototype iPod is missing just a few parts, but before we get to repairing it, let's take a look at what we have here. On the inside of the housing of this iPod Touch, we can see that there's a lot of serialized stickers. While we can only theorize on what these might mean, they're most likely just the different revisions of components that are inside of this iPod. Flipping it over, we can see that there's a serial number sticker, but then more the same, just seemingly vague stickers that indicate different component revisions. But there is one particular sticker that does catch the eye. That being a sticker that looks like it should be for a camera, but seemingly there's no camera there. Keep this in mind as we're going to look further into this in just a few moments. If we compare this prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation to a normal iPod Touch 3rd generation, we can already spot some differences. Aside from, of course, the prototype having many additional stickers, the prototype also lacks any conventional engravings that normal iPod Touch 3rd generations have. Also, while it may look like the prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation is in worse condition than the normal iPod Touch 3rd generation, this is just because there's a clear factory sticker that covers the entire back of the prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation. But if I were to take it off, which I won't, it would likely be in absolute mint condition. After adding a test screen and test digitizer, we can see if this iPod actually works. The screen obviously is not in the best condition, but it'll work for just testing it out. After installing the test components, let's plug it in and see what happens. As we can see, it runs Switchboard. Let's see what the text output of this boot process looks like. As we can see, there's a lot of information here, but only a small amount of it is actually relevant. But let's decode it together so we can get a better understanding of this prototype. The first piece of data that's relevant is where it says iBoot for N18AP. iBoot is simply the bootloader, and N18AP is simply the codename for the iPod Touch 3rd generation. The build tag is the actual iBoot version that this prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation has installed. While this information might seem a little bit unimportant, it actually reveals something quite interesting. The iPod Touch 3rd generation officially released on iPhone OS 3.1, meaning that originally released iPod Touch 3rd generations would have had this iBoot version. But if we compare the iBoot versions, we can see that the prototype one ends in 5.6, while the official iBoot version for iOS 3.1 ends in 6.5. Or to say it simply, the prototype iBoot version is earlier than the release one. Going to the next line where it says build style, we can see that it says development. Essentially, this means that the iBoot version is just a developmental version, because of course it's a prototype. Now, after reviewing the software versions that are installed on this prototype, let's see what the software says about the hardware of this device. CPID, which just means chip ID, just tells us which processor is installed on this iPod. CPRV just stands for chip revision, but CPFM is where things get interesting. CPFM tells us what the fusing of the processor inside this iPod is. Currently being shown is an extremely simplified version of decoding the CPFM. This isn't necessarily correct, but for our purposes, we'll just use it, because it is widely accepted to be quote-unquote the correct way of decoding the CPFM, but it really isn't. The reason why CPFM is important is because it shows if a device is quote-unquote dev fused. With if the CPFM is 0 or 1, it means that it is, but if it's 3, it's not. This could be a whole video going into what you can and can't do with 0 and 1 devices, but we're just keeping it simple. But comparing the CPFM of the prototype, we can see that it's 0.1, which roughly translates to DVT. Which now brings us to the prototype stage that this iPod is. This iPod Touch is of the DVT prototype stage, standing for Design, Validation, Testing. To put it simply, this iPod Touch is right in the middle of the Apple prototype development process, which explains why it looks pretty close to production, but as we saw earlier, it has prototype hardware inside. Now let's take a look at the software that's installed on this iPod. As we can see, this prototype iPod Touch does run non-UI, also known as Switchboard, which is pretty common on prototypes. But on the quote-unquote home screen, we can see that there's an app called Camera FA. At a first glance, it doesn't really make that much sense as to why this app would be on this iPod. This iPod Touch clearly doesn't have a camera, and we have taken a look at other iPod Touch prototypes that don't have this app installed. But if we remember from earlier, this prototype iPod Touch has a camera sticker on the back. Well, as it would turn out, Apple originally was planning to add a camera to the iPod Touch 3rd generation, but due to manufacturing issues, they dropped the feature, making it almost identical to the 2nd generation of iPod Touch. Now there does exist 3rd generation iPod Touches that do have a camera, but because these prototypes have a hardware difference, it makes them extremely expensive, even though they aren't necessarily rarer. But this kind of makes a funny situation, because this prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation does not have a camera, but it still has all of the applications and software as if it did have one. And it does have the camera sticker, but no camera. If I had to try and imagine why this is the case, which is just pure speculation, this prototype iPod Touch 3rd generation was probably one of the first camera-less prototypes. That, or Apple was just too lazy to remove the pre-existing camera software and completely change the factory tape that would be used on these iPods. As well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And now, let's take a look at the software installed on this iPod. For this part, I'll have no commentary. Thank you for watching my video, and I really hope you enjoyed it. If you did like it, I actually have an entire prototype playlist on my channel which is currently being shown. Please also consider leaving a like, and maybe even subscribe to my channel. Anyways, I hope you have a great day.